This is the TTL Podcast. Welcome to another episode of the TTL Podcast, where we're going to talk about a very important tech topic, which is eggnog. It is a tech topic, isn't it, Mon-Chaio?
It became a tech topic. I think we put it into the tech vernacular in the early 2000s, I think.
Yeah, it was about 2006 that we brought it into the XP parlance. But no, actually, seriously, we're going to be just doing a fun little episode to end out the year. We will be talking about eggnog. We'll tell you a little bit about the drink, a bit about how it became slightly a tradition for us, and just any other random topics. So, Mon-Chaio, I think we should warn them about that and then say, next year, you can come back and we will be back on our regularly scheduled rambling talks about technical leadership. But for now, to end off the year for a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, we're just going to talk about eggnog and whatever else comes up.
Absolutely. For those that stumbled onto this episode, but it's not their cup of tea, happy holidays. And we won't be back next week, but we'll be back in the first week of the new year, and we'll see you all then. But we do extort for you to stay because I do think eggnog is a very important topic.
Yeah. And if it's not their cup of tea, then my eggnog is not for them because my eggnog has tea in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe we should start off there. So, Andy, you are drinking a mason jar full of eggnog.
It is inadvisable for me to finish this, but I've now poured it, so I think I have to finish it.
And at your time in the UK, this is perfect alcoholic eggnog drinking time.
Yeah,
right?
It's 8 p.m. here, so it's a good time for this. However, for you, it's noon, and I see that you don't have eggnog. I'm being let down here, Mon-Chaio. You don't have eggnog, although I will give you some slack because I know that you have an entire eggnog process that I think the schedule for this show sped up and it just didn't work out. So what do you have instead?
I have our house Manhattan. So this is something that Kay and I keep in our house. We keep it pre-mixed. Just add cherry. And you can't see it because you're listening through audio, of course. But it's pretty small because, as Andy said, it is noon here. And I do have other things to get done through the day. Oh, but we should mention that when we talk about eggnog, we are talking about alcoholic nog.
Yes.
Not the other stuff.
No. I think at this point we might want to tell people the story of how eggnog became a thing for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll actually find out, because we haven't talked about this for a while. Do we remember the story the same way?
Mm-hmm. Who wants to start here?
I'll start, because mine's pretty bare bones.
Okay.
So we were working at Cardamom, and I think someone in the HR department for Christmas decided to have an eggnog competition. But I'm not exactly sure. We had an eggnog competition. I don't know who kicked it off.
Mm-hmm.
Most people brought in store-bought eggnog. And for the Americans, you know exactly what we're talking about. For the non-Americans, store-bought eggnog is something that you buy in a container. It looks like you're buying milk. But then you pour it, and it has a disgusting, gloopy flavor and consistency. At least that's my take on it.
Yeah. And I also feel like it tastes chemically.
Yeah. It has a very unnatural flavor. I know one person, I can't remember who, brought in vodka to mix into the eggnog, and that's how they made it alcoholic eggnog. But I had recently gotten a cookbook that I still have called The Williamsburg Art of Cookery. It's from Colonial Williamsburg. It's a publication from them. They're a historic recreation site on the east coast of the U.S. And they'd collected a whole bunch of recipes. And they had an eggnog recipe. And I thought, hey, why not make real eggnog? But after I read the recipe, I thought there's no way in hell, I've sworn, there's no way there's no way that I was going to use that full recipe because it starts out with beat well the yolks of 3 dozen eggs. I was not going to beat 3 dozen egg yolks. I wasn't going to buy 3 dozen egg yolks. So I cut it down to 5 egg yolks. And it made I think it makes about a gallon. So
Okay.
I actually have a gallon of eggnog sitting in my fridge right now. But that was it. So we did the competition, and I don't remember which one won. There was a lot of eggnog drunk that day.
So you're right. We should talk about it because I think I remember it slightly differently. In my recollection, you had purchased this book.
Oh, did I instigated this?
So yes, I think the genesis, not of the competition itself, I don't know. The genesis of it, I don't think, of the competition itself, I don't think was necessarily you, but you had purchased this book. And for whatever reason, you decided to share with us that you had purchased this book. Andy, I don't know why you thought we would be interested. I'm just joking. It was really interesting. I'll tell you about the other part that's interesting in a bit. But we saw this eggnog recipe in it. And then we said, well, we want to make this. So how can we
justify this?
make an excuse to make it and justify it? And so we got everyone on board with the eggnog off. And you're right. Whenever I do remember the beat well 3 dozen eggs. And every time I think about that, and every time I make eggnog, I think about Beauty and the Beast. Are you familiar with that Disney cartoon?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what part is coming to mind for you, though.
So, do you recall Gaston? He's the brutish character.
No one Santa like Gaston. I can't remember what he does.
That's right. That's right. And he has a section in that song, because I can't remember that whole song either. He says,
Something
now
about
that I'm
eating...
grown, I eat 5 dozen eggs.
Yes.
So I'm roughly the size of a barge. Right? So I think about that all the time.
All right. So...
But so I do think about that, and I think we wanted an excuse to make it, and we decided to have an eggnog off. The other interesting part about that is, do you remember what else we found in the book as we were looking through it? I don't even know that eggnog was the first thing that we found.
There's so many things in this book. I don't know.
Yeah,
What
my
was the other one?
recollection was one of the first things we found, either before eggnog or after, was something around potted meats, where you take these meats and you bury them in the ground for weeks on end, probably after having corned them or something. But I do recall that also being in the book.
It's that sounds very likely. I don't remember that. Let me see if I can find anything about this. Let's see. Where would that be? Where would that be? It's not in Observations Upon Soups. Could be in Of Flesh and Fish.
Uh-huh.
Or it could be Of Preserving and Pickling.
Yeah, I think that's probably more likely.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, eggnog is in the section titled Of Health Drinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, before I continue to look for the potted meats thing, I will bring up a little bit more of why Of Health Drinking is hilarious, given... So you start with 3 dozen eggs, and then 2.5 pounds of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And then you use 1 pint of French brandy. And then you need to add another ½ pound of sugar to the egg whites. And then to the yolks, you need 2 quarts of milk and 2 quarts of cream and 1 gallon of brandy. So we have 1 gallon and a pint of alcohol. That's about 4 liters, 4 full liters, if not a little more. And then you have 2 quarts plus 2 quarts of cream. So you have a gallon of dairy and 3 dozen eggs. So I think one person could drink that in a night. They'd be fine.
And I think I've modified the recipe slightly since then. Although it sounds like you are also using that same recipe as the base for your current tea eggnog or whatnot.
Yeah, so we must have made it a couple times because in my cooking journal, which was much more meticulously kept around that time, I have two different eggnog recipes. I have eggnog 1 and eggnog 2, which I think must be that we tried it
Mm-hmm.
and then decided, no, 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 that's not quite right. And then we did it differently.
Mm-hmm.
Eggnog 2 is not what I used this time. I used eggnog 1
Mm-hmm.
because eggnog 2 looks a bit much. It's only cream. There's no milk.
Interesting. Okay. That, knowing how my eggnog turns out, yeah, that is a bit much.
But you have a long drawn out process for your eggnog, don't you?
I do. And I'll tell you that book set me on some sort of eggnog journey, which now will never end. I think probably even more than for you, because I don't. Have you made much eggnog prior to us deciding that we were going to do this show and you wanted to make an eggnog for it?
No, so in the intervening, what is it? That was about 2006. So
Mm-hmm.
this has been what, for 17 years?
Yeah, right.
So in the intervening 17 years, I think I've made it twice or three times. I think you make it every year, don't you?
I do. I make it every year. So I don't recall exactly how this happened. So it's about 2006 that we started doing this. I don't know how much I made it between 2006 and say 2009, 2010, somewhere around there. Maybe a few times. But 2009 was when I met Kay, who obviously is my wife now, but we weren't married then. And I can't remember when the first year was that I was invited to her family Thanksgiving. They do a family Thanksgiving with some of their family friends, including her godparents and whatnot. And everybody brings something. Kay ends up bringing Swedish meatballs. I think my mother-in-law ends up bringing like seafood salad. It's just an eclectic thing. And then the hosts generally will do the turkey and the mashed potatoes and whatnot, and other people will bring sides. By the way, is Thanksgiving a thing in the UK, or is that too sore of a subject and people don't celebrate it?
Oh, of course it's a thing. They give thanks that
Okay.
the U.S. left them. No,
As they
no, it's
should.
not. It's Thanksgiving is an interesting topic because that's where differences in culinary tradition start to show up.
Wow. Maybe we'll have
I
time
was
to
just
talk
having a
about that.
discussion today about differences in what stuffing is.
Versus dressing versus.
No, no, versus UK English stuffing versus American stuffing.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
See, this is why we're always rambling. We learn something new all the time. But to get back on topic, what was my topic? Oh, right. So, for those that don't know, in the US, Thanksgiving, there's a giant turkey, which might be one of the worst fowl to eat. But it is tradition. And then there's disgusting things like green bean casserole, which is
I've
often
cut that
goopy
from
and
my
messy.
menu now because I couldn't take it anymore. For tradition, I didn't want to do it.
Yeah, some sort of yam stuff, often with weird marshmallows broiled on top. It's a
Yep.
weird holiday. So we did bring sides, and the sides are generally a little bit better, like I mentioned, Swedish meatballs. But I was tasked with bringing something. And that first year, I brought eggnog. And this was my first iteration of eggnog, not even my current iteration. But based on that, I was told I would be never allowed back into Thanksgiving again without arriving with eggnog.
Oh, so you're being like put under pressure to continue this.
Exactly. And it's not just for me, right? Everyone has to bring their side. Like Kay brings her Swedish meatballs every year. It's not like she won't be allowed in, but she'll be frowned upon. I think I would actually be
You'd be
stopped at the
turned
gate
away.
and told to go home. And over the years, eggnog has really factored into sort of this holiday. Back when Kay's grandfather was still alive, there was a really funny scene one year where he had tried the eggnog for the first time. He lived down in San Diego and he came up to Seattle for the celebration. And in the house where we do the celebration, there's this easy chair. It's tufted and large and very comfortable with a footstool. And he was 80 something at the time. And you just see him there on his third glass of eggnog, reclined, smiling, and quite asleep.
And if you have not had eggnog, so when I read that recipe, you should be thinking that it's pretty alcoholic. It is.
hmm Hmm.
It is very alcoholic. It is. It's probably just under 20%. I think you did the calculation once, you said. I
I
guess
did.
about 18%.
Oh no, not the way I make it now.
Oh no. Okay, so what's
So,
your
oh,
way of
sorry,
doing it
sorry.
now?
No, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I was looking at different numbers because I did two different calculations. Yeah, so my eggnog turns out to be just above 15%.
Okay.
A glass of fortified wine, perhaps, something around
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Except it's so sweet and creamy. It just goes down.
Hmm. It really is. It's very difficult to stop drinking. For Thanksgiving, it ends up being a party of approximately 15 to 20, yeah, about 15 adults generally. And we will regularly go through about a gallon and a half of eggnog with that group. And that's not the only alcoholic beverage there. Wine is served. In fact, this year there were these cocktails served that some people drank a lot of and didn't even partake in eggnog. And we went through about a gallon and a half.
So what is this multiply iterated recipe now?
So why don't I just give everyone my recipe because I don't think it's super secret, and then I'll tell you the technique. So it's very similar to your eggnog one recipe. In fact, that's where it started from. I think it just really has probably one additional egg yolk. So
You go to 6 rather than 5?
right, I go to 6 rather than 5, and I usually, because of the crowd, have to make a double batch. But this ends up being about, like Andy was saying, about a gallon of eggnog here. So you take 6 egg yolks and you beat it with 1 cup of sugar. Best if you can use superfine sugar or baking sugar, just because when you cream egg yolks, it makes a difference in terms of how grainy it is.
Yeah.
And once you add the alcohol in, the sugar, the dissolving of the sugar it doesn't continue to dissolve in the same way. So if you can get them creamed in with superfine sugar, that's great. So 6 egg yolks, a cup of sugar. And then what I do is I add in a pint of brandy and a cup of rum. The important thing here is to drizzle them in slowly so it doesn't curdle the egg yolks. And we can talk about why that is about curdling. But you don't want curdles. I do end up straining out the small bits of curdles that you get, but like the best thing to do is try not to get curdles. I've never been successful, no matter how slowly I drizzle, to not get any, but I can keep it pretty small. So a pint of brandy, a cup of rum, drizzle that in, stir it all up. And then what I do is I bottle that up and I leave it for a year.
Just the egg yolk, sugar, and alcohol.
Egg yolks, sugar, and alcohol, right? I actually keep it in the back of my fridge. I've heard people keep eggnog, not necessarily this mixture, but other mixtures in their garage or whatever. I'm assuming the garage doesn't get super hot, but I keep it in the fridge for a year. And then about 24 to 48 hours before I'm serving the eggnog, I will take that mixture out, shake it up, and then strain it. I'll add 1 pint of cream, and what I'm using now is actually heavy whipping cream, so about 44% milk fat.
Yeah.
And then 1 pint of whole milk, which is about 4% milk fat. So your dairy ends up being somewhere around, I think, 30 some odd percent dairy. Is that right? Sorry.
30.
Let's see, 48. So we end up being
No,
like 48.
You'd end up being about 20
About 24. 20,
Yeah.
yeah. 24% dairy is where we end up here. So a pint of 44% cream, a pint of whole milk. I end up mixing those in. And then I take 6 egg whites. I beat them to soft peaks, not hard peaks. And then I end up folding that in pretty well into the eggnog mixture. And then serve with a ladle and grated nutmeg on top. So that's my eggnog recipe. The aging over a year really does wonders. There's a number of different things, I think. One is I don't use fancy alcohol in my eggnogs. And so it does soften the flavors. And really, the flavors are quite different. It ends up being, I don't know, it's like caramelly and nutty at the same time. So it's super interesting. I've tried non-aged and aged, and I think the aged is quite a bit better. Also, for those people that worry about salmonella, which in eggs, which I don't think you actually should. I think both in the U.S. and U.K. now, salmonella in eggs is super, super, super low, even in raw eggs.
Yeah.
But if you look at the research, it takes...
The UK does a different approach. All of Europe does a different approach. They don't wash the eggs.
Oh, they don't?
And they don't wash the eggs. which is actually important for keeping the salmonella out. So eggs have a membrane on the outside of the shell, and the washing that's done in the US, which cleans off all like feathers and all of that. Because in the UK, you buy eggs, you'll sometimes find a feather with it and like little smears on the egg and that kind of thing. But when they wash the eggs, that membrane gets washed off. The egg shell is porous, and then that's how salmonella gets in much more easily.
Makes sense. Makes sense to me. But to continue the last part, if you are worried, again, I don't think you really should be. The rates are super low. Apparently, it takes approximately 3 weeks of sitting in alcohol in order to kill all the salmonella bacteria.
Your 1 year is more than adequate.
Absolutely. So that's my process.
Okay. Yeah, so that is fairly similar to the eggnog one, other than actually the two parts that are really different. One is the straining. That wasn't something we did, and that sounds like a really good idea because it can get a little grainy if you're not careful. And the other one is the 1 year. I think I went for, on this one, it was maybe a week or a few days. The one I have now, I let age for about 3 weeks.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people I've read age their eggnog with dairy for a year or 3 months or however long they age it. I'm a little bit... So we did the calculations, right? It's about 15.5% ABV with the dairy. Wine
Which kills
stores,
a lot of stuff, but...
yeah. And I would imagine that also the taste sort of changes. You might imagine with the alcohol interacting with like the dairy proteins, you probably get a different taste and texture over a year with your dairy in it. I'm just not brave enough to try that. Without the dairy, with the egg mixture, it ends up being about 32% ABV. So I feel pretty confident in that, about a 64 proof mixture being fairly safe from contamination.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the one you'll be serving next year, because you've already served the one for this year.
Correct, yes.
I, this year, I decided I wanted to do something a little different, and I thought, what would be fun with eggnog? And eggnog is a lot of milk, and I like making chai. So chai is a lot of milk. Well, milk is a very important component in making chai taste right, the spiced tea. So I decided to try out putting some ginger, cinnamon, clove, star anise, and cardamom, and black peppercorns into my rum and let that sit for a few weeks. And then use that rum. So I do about half rum, half brandy, or one third, 2/3, somewhere around there, rum and brandy. And so my rum was spiced, and it was a dark spiced rum. Well, dark rum that I spiced. And then I let sit for a couple weeks with the egg yolks and the sugar. And then I made the milk, not the cream, just the milk, because I didn't want the cream to start separating. I made a tea. So I heated it up. Essentially, I scalded the milk with tea inside it, in it. So it changed color a little bit. And then you got the scalding effect, which I was looking in Harold McGee's on cooking to figure out what does scalding exactly do to milk. And he didn't have anything about what scalding does to milk. I was like, this is a thing called for in so many recipes, and he does not cover what does scalding do to milk. So I have no idea what it does to milk.
Interesting.
I scalded the milk with the tea in it, and then I did the whole mixing it all together. And then I serve it with a little grating of nutmeg on top. And what I've ended up with is there's just this subtle cinnamon and cardamom flavor. It gets overpowered by all of the other things going on. So I'm not sure it was really worth it. It's a fun thing to do, but I was hoping something would have a little bit more of the spice flavor going.
So let me rewind here. So you definitely infused your alcohol with that flavoring.
Hmm.
Then you did the scalded milk, and then when hot, you mixed your alcohol into the milk.
No, I let the milk cool.
You let the milk cool, and then you mixed your alcohol into the milk. So
Yeah.
interesting.
Oh, and I forgot to say that the rum also had fresh ginger bruised and then shoved into the bottle as well.
I'm
So.
curious whether adding more of these spices into the milk.
Mm.
I've actually looked up scalded milk here just while we were talking, and it says it's typically scalded to increase temperature, change consistency because of denaturing of protein. So I don't actually know if you have to do that.
Yeah, I know it changes something about the milk because you're basically you're hitting the pasteurization temperature.
hmm But most of the dairy, at least in the U.S., is
It's
already
pasteurized.
pasteurized and
So
ultra
maybe that's what
pasteurized.
it since the milk is already pasteurized, it doesn't do much to it anymore.
Yeah, I would imagine that's probably true. I mean,
Hmm.
there could be something with like, because ultra pasteurization is like a high temperature for 2 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So maybe holding it at temp does something else to the proteins. But
Yeah,
yeah, I would
there's the different
imagine.
pasteurization methods, and he did talk about those. There's the
hmm
low temperature, longer time pasteurization, then there's the ultra high temperature pasteurization, which, as you said, you get it up there just a few seconds, and then you bring it back down.
Well, and I would say that for my eggnog recipe, I think you could probably do it without alcohol. I think you might have to change some of the ratios. But for yours, I would definitely not do it without alcohol. Because I think that a lot of the spices that you're using, which I'm not using, have alcohol soluble flavors and oils and stuff. So I think it's super important to use alcohol in yours. Otherwise, you just get, I guess, chai, right?
Well, I think one of the things I could do is lower the alcohol because the heat. I think it's the heat of the alcohol is taking over the spice flavor.
Interesting.
With the lower alcohol, I'd get those alcohol soluble flavors and all of that.
hmm
Still get a little bit of the kick. But if I can get it to the point where the heat is just in the background,
hmm
then the spices might come through.
And what are you using, like fancy? Or you said you were using a dark rum, right? So
It's a
aged.
it's a Captain Morgan's dark rum.
That's
Yeah,
probably food coloring, I would guess.
very likely. Yeah.
Yeah. You might try like an aged rum, which has had some of the edge taken off through,
Mm,
barrel aging or whatnot.
yeah.
That might be something to try. But is it enjoyable? You have a mason jar of it right there.
It is. I had some last night because I figured I can't get on here tonight and
Uh-huh.
do this entire show and have never tasted it before because it could have been poison
Mm-hmm.
and I might have had to throw it away and make another batch.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it is good enough to have it multiple nights in a row. My sleep does not appreciate this. I don't sleep well when I have alcohol, so
I have a
drinking
I have a
drinking almost a pint of eggnog is not going to go well
well,
for
and
me.
I have a buddy that now only drinks in the morning because his sleep, if he drinks past noon, his sleep is bad with alcohol. And I'm like, why bother at all? When do you drink in the morning? I don't even know how that works. So, do you still do the egg white thing where you beat the egg whites and fold them in at the end, or
Yeah, I did do that.
okay?
A lot of the recipes called for beat them until they're stiff,
Mm-hmm.
which I always took as stiff peaks.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned until soft peaks, and so I tried that this time, and yeah, it doesn't seem to make a huge difference. I
Hmm.
think I went slightly past the soft peaks though. It's so hard to hit that just
It
right.
really is. And the trick I've learned, I don't know, did you do them by hand or by machine?
I did them by machine. Sorry, I think I have a little bit of spice in my tooth. I did them by machine because, to go off on another random topic, I had used my hand whisk. I was in the
hmm
wood shop because I was mixing up milk paint with it.
My hand whisk was in my wood shop. That is something I don't think I'll hear for another 20 years, Andy.
Yeah, so yesterday when I was putting the egg whites in, I I was spending most of the day going back and forth to the wood shop that I have as I was painting the tool chest I've been making, which if anyone follows me on LinkedIn, you would have seen a picture last week, or what would have this been? The week of the 11th of December. There was a picture that I posted, something about taking small steps, and there was a picture of dovetails. That was the toolbox that I was making. And so yesterday, I was finishing it up. The day before, I had put the dovetails together, and I cut the feet. And so sorry, I should explain what this is. I'm making a tool chest. The tool chest body itself is nailed together. It's rebated and nailed. The bottom is shiplapped and nailed on. The top is a panel construction. So it's a groove inside the sides, and the panel sits in there. It floats in there so that it can move. Then it needed feet to hold it off the ground. And to do that, I made like a little skirt that goes around the whole base. And the 4 pieces of the skirt are dovetailed together and then cut so that they have like a little bit more levity to them, a little lightness. So they just are feet rather than just like this solid monolith. And yesterday, I finally got it to the point where I could paint it. To paint it, I decided, because I never want to make anything simple, I want to do something different every single time. So to paint it, I decided I want to try using milk paint. It's a traditional paint. And I guess this kind of sticks on the milk theme that we're having for this. So milk paint it's a paint that's been used for millennia. I've heard people say that it goes all the way back to like ancient Egyptians. You make cheese. You make ricotta or paneer, if you've ever made those. So both of those are milk heated up, and then you add an acid. Ricotta, it's generally lemon. In paneer, it's generally vinegar. And that curdles the milk. So you strain that off, and then to that, you start adding, I think it was lime. You add a little lime, and you mix that together, and then you add some water, and you do some other stuff. And it's just a couple of things, like there's some clay or something, I think, that goes in. And then pigment. And then that's the paint.
Okay.
So you can buy it now as powder, and you mix it with water. And the powder is somewhat hydroscopic.
Okay.
So it doesn't like mixing. Hydrophobic?
Hydrophobic, doesn't like mixing with water, yeah.
Yeah, so it doesn't like mixing with water, so it takes a bit. So I used my whisk. So I didn't have my whisk to whisk my egg whites by hand because I was painting a tool chest.
Okay, so you didn't have your hand whisk. But tip for next time, one good way to make sure that you hit your peaks is, I used to be pretty militant about beating by hand because I have this like, what I call it, like terrible streak in me where I have to do things traditionally or whatnot. Masochistic, is that what they call it? Sort of.
I think you should try woodworking.
But I'm trying to wean myself off of a lot of these. And so generally what I do now is start with machine and then finish by hand. And that ends up working pretty well. But I think the soft peaks are important. Over the years, I found that if I end up not getting soft peaks, I end up with this raft of egg white foam that floats on top of the eggnog.
Oh, you don't get that with the soft peaks.
No, you don't. You have to fold them in pretty well, but then you don't get that with the soft peaks. You might get a small one, but no, it looks like it's like bubbles, tiny bubbles within the eggnog all the way down. Which is really
that's
nice.
Yeah, that's what I want. Because right now, like when I poured my eggnog tonight, the first thing I had to do was with the ladle, mix it and mix it and mix it and mix it to try to get that back in. And of course, unless I was willing to stand there for about 10 minutes, it wasn't all going to go in.
Right, and it's tricky. You'll have to figure out what the right whipped egg white, or what would you call it, thickness or whatever is. You should get it there where once you fold, so when you first dump it in, obviously it's going to float. But once you end up folding it in, it should be not completely homogenized, but fairly homogenized. I've actually tried different other things. So if you look online, there's some sort of single serving eggnog recipes. And one year, my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law, I'm pretty sure this was during COVID, made me send them eggnog mix down because they couldn't come up for Thanksgiving. This is what I have to deal with now with this eggnog. Although, if they're listening, to be fair to them, they didn't come up this year, and they didn't make me send it down this year. So, but that one year they were like, send it down. So I'm pretty sure I just sent the mix down to them without the dairy, right? And I said, okay, you mix the dairy in at the end. But since I sent it down in smaller quantities, I didn't really know like how many egg whites or whatever. So I basically said, hey, look, keep this in your fridge. When you want to take it out, put this amount in a cocktail shaker, or put an egg white in a cocktail shaker, shake it up, and then put the eggnog mix in, and then shake it up.
Yeah,
and
that'd
a lot
be a
of
good way.
and a lot of single serving eggnog recipes do that. If you do, it's not bad, but it's not the same. You don't get the same frothiness.
Yeah,
and the
well,
texture's
you
not
won't
quite right.
unless you're going to be standing there with your cocktail shaker for about 20 minutes. I don't think you're going to get anywhere close to soft peaks with
Right.
your egg.
Right. And so even though you can get frothiness on a cocktail shaker for certain cocktails or whatever, it'll do okay with the eggnog. But your best bet is really to try to beat them to soft peaks or right around there.
Well, we've been going for a little while on this now. I'm thinking that we should let people go and have their Christmas and their New Year, or whatever they're doing when they listen to this show.
I agree.
So
But this was
is
fun.
there any last tip that we'd leave anyone with?
So one last tip on the eggnog front that I'll leave someone with. Store-bought eggnog is generally terrible, at least in the US. I don't know if they even have this in the UK. Do
No, they don't. Oh, we didn't even touch on that. No, this is not really known over here at all.
Interesting.
So I should
Even
probably
though
start
eggnog
introducing it.
started with like 13th century monks or whatever, which
So,
obviously were not here.
well, I've done a little bit of looking into this, and from what I found and what I heard, people aren't exactly sure where eggnog came from. Oh, so Max Miller, Tasting History, did an episode 2 years ago on eggnog.
Hmm.
And he always does cook something or make a drink and then talk about the history of it. So he talked about the history of eggnog. And the answer is it first showed up 17th century, 1700s? No, 1700s, not 17th century. United States. Well, colonies. As just a word. It didn't, no one knows where the words came from. The best idea of what nog is, according to him, is that nog was dialect in, I think it was Norwich of the UK, for a beer. So egg beer. But that doesn't really make much sense. So we don't really know where it came from. We just know that it really does show up in the US and in the colonies, but it never really showed up elsewhere. There are cooked eggnogs, or cooked alcoholic custards, I guess it would be. Because, if anyone is thinking, what the hell, why are you drinking this? This is just an uncooked custard with a lot of alcohol in it.
Yes.
So you can also cook it. You can make more of a crème anglaise, which in the UK is just called custard. I still find that just weird. Custard to me is a solid thing, not a flowy thing. But you could make crème anglaise and add a bunch of alcohol.
Which essentially is, well, this is not cooked, but right.
Yeah, it's not cooked. If you did the cooking, yeah. So yeah, no one, as far as I know, no one really knows where this came from. It just showed up.
Yeah, and I've heard the same thing. I've heard that nog comes from like grog or like a strong beer. So you've heard that, or
So egg grog, he addresses that one. It didn't show up until like 1950 as an explanation.
oh, interesting.
So it's pretty unlikely to, and there's no point in time where anyone wrote egg grog,
Mm,
which
that makes
kind
sense.
of blows it out of the water as a possibility.
Makes sense. Yeah, what I've heard is that it comes from a medieval Britain thing called posset.
Yep, posset.
Posset.
Yep.
Yep.
Possets around here sometimes. It's
Okay,
It's a
okay.
very fancy thing.
Okay. And then one theory that I read was that the U.S. just had a lot of cows and chickens and farms and farmland. And so,
So, with an
you know.
excess of cream, what are you going to do with it?
Right.
You're going to get
preservation
drunk.
methods, right? Exactly. Okay. But, and going back to your creme anglaise thing, I think you told me that there is a Dutch drink, which is essentially a cooked cream. eggnog type thing, right?
Aquavat, or however
Right.
it's pronounced.
Or advocat. Yeah, it's definitely cooked. So I would call it a cooked eggnog. And for cooked eggnogs, I think because of folks who know when you cook custard, when you make creme anglaise, it gets a little bit thicker and you get that different mouthfeel. That is a way to avoid doing the egg white thing. But I don't think it's quite the same. It's a little bit more.
It's more cloying.
I don't want to. I was going to use the word cloying, but yeah, it coats the
You
tongue
were
a
trying
little bit
not
more,
to.
as I would say. Exactly. The mouth feels a little different. It's a little heavier on the tongue, I would say. Do you have an eggnog tip, or maybe a non-eggnog tip?
I think my non-eggnog tip is experiment with milk paint. It's cool. It's interesting. So I put a base color of red on my toolbox, and then I did a color of black over the top. And so as it gets dings and scuffs and wear, a little bit of red will show through. And yeah, now I'm putting boiled linseed over it to give it a bit of a sheen, because it's a very matte look. In fact, it was so matte that the pictures of my toolbox, it looked like a black hole.
Is there a specific time when you would say use milk paint because it looks different or like its properties are different? Like, would you paint the interior of your house with it, for example?
I probably wouldn't do the interior of the house. Like furniture, it's pretty standard for furniture. In fact, a lot of the distressed look furniture, they're using not an egg. They're using a milk paint.
Gotcha.
They're using an eggnog paint.
You got egg on the mind, man.
But you don't have to do it in that distressed look. You can
Gotcha.
just paint it on, use a paste wax, and get a nice matte, but slightly sheen look. And for eggnog, I would say just do it. Just find a recipe online. Don't be afraid of it. Just give it a try and go for it.
Yeah. In the U.S., again, I'll just mention it is a completely different drink in my experience than store-bought. So even if you hate store-bought eggnog and would never drink it like me, do it, as Andy said. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
All right. At this point, I think we need to wrap it up. We went 10 minutes past the point where I said, let's try to wrap this up. So I wish everyone a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and we will see you again in January. Until next time, be kind and stay curious.